Good afternoon. It's Way T Lightheart with the Awesome Health Podcast brought to you by BiOptimizers. And I'm here with a guest that I'm so excited to have, Jason Ferruggia from Renegade Radio. And we were chatting just before we got started here. We're a couple of grizzly old weight training veterans. And of course, Jason's out of Santa Monica, California. He's trained some of the who's who around the world. I think 70 different sports or something like that you have athletes in, isn't it? Yeah, pretty wild. So people can get familiar with you and your story and what you're currently up to because you're doing so many things. Can you share with everyone in your own words who you are and what it is that you do or your mission in life?
Sure. I mean, I don't know how detailed you want me to get on the early days. I can kind of just speed through it kind of quickly. So I started, it's kind of stereotypical. I was a skinny, weak kid, and I hated that. And I grew up, the same time you did, where Schwarzenegger and Stallone were on the big screen, the Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan were on wrestling on Saturday mornings. And I was like, man, I want to be jacked like those guys and, just be like superhero kind of. So I got into it for those reasons. I played sports and I was never that great. I was always just small and weak. So, long story short, got into training. It did change my life and gave me a lot more confidence and enabled me to do a lot of things better. And so when I was in college and I got tuberculosis actually from a foreign exchange student that was living on our floor, and I had to come back home and be on bed rest. Literally, I was in the hospital for a week, and then I had to be in bed rest for 3 months, and that was 93, 94. So I was home, and back then, you remember, like the only place you could get information was in the back of Iron Man magazine. You could order like VHS tapes and everything. And
totally, dude.
Certifications. So I ordered a bunch of that stuff, and all I did was just read and watch that stuff while I was at home. And then I got my first certification that spring, started training people that summer, and the business just kind of blew up. And back then I had never read anything about business, didn't know the first thing about business, but I was pretty successful. And then it grew, a couple years later, I got my first athlete, and that was really exciting for me. So I had one of the original kind of well-known small underground hardcore gyms where years before anyone was doing it, years before it was popular, we were dragging sleds and flipping tires, and we had rings and group training and stuff like that. So the business blew up rapidly where I had a ton of athletes, and then started writing online 2000, 2001, really made it probably my main focus 2006-ish. And been writing for magazines, written books. And so my mission now is, back then it was just about training athletes, younger guys, getting them bigger, stronger, faster, helping them get scholarships, break records, set PRs. And that was amazing. Those are some of the best years of my life. But now I'm 42. So I just really enjoy a more well-rounded approach where it's, everything: lifestyle, mindset, personal development, training. And it's, of course, you and I have talked about, as you get older, you got to modify your training a little bit, but just basically trying to help people kind of unleash their strongest self in every way possible.
That's great. There's a lot to unpack in that whole story. What do you feel is the most important components of someone who wants to look better? And is there differences, as you said, 20, 30, 40, 50? What have you noticed? Because you've trained like literally thousands of people. So you're not a theoretical guy. Yeah. You're in the trenches on a daily basis still today.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you have to simplify it. And if you and I were alone talking training, we could geek out on like the most rare things that we've done, but that doesn't help the majority of people. You and I have spent hundreds of thousands of hours in the gym. And if I were to talk to Joe DeFranco or something, but the average person, what's funny is even an athlete, like if you take a guy, let's say from the Lakers, or let's say Brad Pitt comes in for his next role where he has to be shirtless, they're not really that advanced. They don't know that much. And if you overwhelm them with a ton of complicated stuff, it just never works. And it's like any habit you try to form, it has to be simple. So I always try to simplify things, and I have to resist the urge because, when you're training as long as we have, you get bored and you're always you want to do new, fancy, cool stuff. Mm-hmm. But it's like anything else in life. It comes back to simplicity, keeping it simple, something that people can stick with. Because, if you do those daily things on a routine basis for years, it adds up to great results. People kind of want to get too excited and jump into the fanciest stuff, and then they're burnt out in a month. So I always try to keep it simple. Same thing with nutrition. Keep it simple. Try to adopt one new habit at a time. People will try to take on 5 new habits at a time, and that's 100% failure rate. Like if you say Monday, okay, I'm going to stop drinking soda. I'm going to stop eating Big Macs. I'm going to go from not training at all to training 6 days a week. No way those things are going to happen. Maybe just stop the Big Macs and then do like literally a 10-minute workout where you do 2 sets of push-ups, 2 sets of inverted rows, and 2 sets of bodyweight squats. Now you want to get more advanced. Obviously, you can do, if someone from the Lakers or Brad Pitt comes in, like I said, the push-ups and bodyweight squats ain't going to cut it. But the workout still doesn't have to be that crazy. Like, 4 days a week, 30, 40 minutes, simple stuff.
That's great. So for somebody who's, let's say, walks into your facility, they're 30 pounds overweight, they're 40 years old. They were an athlete in high school, got away from them with the family and the business kind of thing, and that sort of stuff. They're kind of sitting there going, man, I got to get back in shape, man. And I just got to do something about it. Where do they start?
So I would give them, now here's where I'm going to contradict myself a little bit, because I like to keep it simple, but someone like that obviously isn't obsessed with training the way you and I are. So I want to make it fun too. So instead of just giving them this basic workout with the fundamentals, and we do that for 16 weeks, like there's some purists and traditionalists say, oh, just do these 4 exercises forever. Just bench, squat, dead, military press. Maybe, but that's boring as could be. And you're going to get overuse injuries. So even though maybe the beginner could do the same thing over and over, I know real world application. Guys get bored. Everybody gets bored. So I change it up. I'll change the workout slightly. We might do a 3 or 4 week cycle, but the reps might change slightly. Maybe we move our grip in from a 15-inch to a 16-inch. Maybe we put fat grips on. A little change each week. And then it's also important for people to set PRs. So no matter where they're starting, someone comes to you, they squat 315. It's fun for them to get up to 325. If they can only do 10 body weight squats, it's fun to see that now they can do 20. 1 chin up to 5. So we set PRs in there throughout the week. But I would keep it simple again, like an upper lower split would be great. A lot of people say, well, beginners should always do full body. And I get that. But from a system perspective, I like to keep everything the same. So 4 days a week, upper lower works well. As you get more advanced, you can split that up even more. But yeah, like an upper body workout might literally be a few sets of pushes, a few sets of pulls, some overhead presses, chins, maybe a set of curls or 2. And then similar but different exercises 2 days later. And then the same type of thing on the lower body. At the beginning, a lot of people don't have the mobility to squat and deadlift. So you might do a phase where it's all single leg unilateral stuff. So split squats, single leg RDLs, maybe some body weight leg curls on a stability ball or Jungle Gym XT or something like that, planks, basic stuff like that. And then as far as diet goes, I'd really see where they're at. And again, not try to make huge dramatic changes, but just try to eliminate the junk food, the fried food, all the basic stuff. And again, if that guy has to lose 30 pounds for a wedding or a TV show or something in 60 days, then we're going to ramp it up a little more. We're going to have to go more extreme with the diet,
You bring up a great topic there. So let's talk about that guy for a second. We're going to switch gears into that person. So now you've got the person that's like, okay, I've got a deadline. I've got to achieve this for whatever reason, whether it's a cosmetic or a business reason or that sort of stuff. What's the story with this character?
Yeah, we got to ramp it up, but not so much. You still have to be smart about it where you can't cripple the guy. If he's coming off the couch, he's got 30 pounds, he hasn't done anything. Some people take that military boot camp approach and slaughter the guy, and that's not going to work. So his joints are going to be aching. He's just going to be overproducing cortisol. But we're going to build up the volume every single week. So he'll still do that 4-day split I talked about, but he might do 1 or 2 sets per exercise the first week, and then we'll amp it up. We'll keep ramping it up so he's doing more volume over time. The diet, I'll stick with it. The conditioning, I'm going to have him start with low intensity conditioning, so just traditional kind of cardio, walking, incline walking, whatever, for the first couple weeks. And then once his body's ready and acclimated, we're going to start doing some intervals, and we'll start slow. So maybe he'll do 20 to 30 seconds hard and 1 minute to 2 minutes off, and literally for 7 minutes. Then we'll increase it to 10 minutes. Eventually, by the end of the 90 days or how much time he has, it might be up to 30 minutes twice a week. As far as the diet goes, we're not going to have time to allow junk food. at least the first 2 weeks, I want him to be super dedicated. And maybe we'll give him a cheat meal on Sunday night where he's an hour to eat a cheat meal, pizza, ice cream, whatever. But I'm going to go basically, I know you and I have talked about lower protein. In a case like that, though, I mean, I don't think super high protein does what the magazines say and gets you jacked. But probably that guy probably hasn't eaten enough protein. So I'm going to give him a little bit more protein. I'm going to bring his starches and carbs down a little bit, a lot of vegetables, a lot of fruit. Not to overload his digestive system, though. I'm going to have most of his vegetables be steamed, drink a green juice each day, things like that. Because, again, if you do so much at once, people are going to feel terrible and overwhelmed. So, carbs would be fairly low at the beginning. Because, again, that guy wants to see progress. That's going to keep him excited. So we know long-term, you could argue if low-carb diets are great or not. But short-term, at least you'll see 10, 20 pounds come off rapidly. And then if he's, he makes his roll or the wedding or whatever, we could say, all right, now long-term, let's talk about what kind of realistic changes you want to make.
That's great. You bring up something that's very interesting here, and you got a very balanced observation of it. I'd like you to dive a little deeper on that. This whole debate between low carb versus high fat, high protein. So you have the high protein, moderate carbohydrate groups. You got the high fat, low protein, and then you've got the 30. Like, what's the real world telling you based on outside of theory? What are you seeing realistically that's sustainable over a long term? Because at the end of the day, anybody can produce a short term result.
Right.
Using, I could starve myself and lose 30 pounds. It's not a strategy. I could cut all carbs forever. That's not necessarily a strategy. So what have you noticed?
And as well as I do that there's that kind of honeymoon period where you switch over to a new diet and you're like, I'm never eating any other way again. This is amazing. That always happens. So if you want to take a guy and have him look bigger, always look pumped, always look fuller from increasing, intracellular like glycogen storage and whatnot. If he's on a low carb diet and you crank his carbs up and give him high volume training for 2 weeks, all of a sudden he's going to look yoked. But we know that's not sustainable. You know what I mean? As soon as you go back to low volume and low carbs, you're the exact same size. That's good to get someone, like we just said, for like a 2-week thing or something. Same thing happens when you cut carbs, the opposite. And then once you've lost the water weight, you end up being that smaller, flabby version of yourself, which anyone like you and I hate. So I think sustainable long-term. I've done, I originally did the Cyclic ketogenic diet with Duchesne's and the anabolic diet back in, what was that, like 93, 94?
Yeah, it's going way back. I saw it then way back in the day. I have a whole story about that, but keep going.
Okay. So I actually did that Cyclic ketogenic diet for 2 years, which is really a long time. Most people burn out on it earlier, but I definitely don't think it's sustainable long-term. I know it's kind of like the hot thing now. You've been around the business forever. Like the pendulum always swings. Something's hot, and then everybody jumps on it, and then a year later, they're kind of over it again.
Why do you think it's not sustainable? Just to go down that before we get to the other part.
A long-term ketogenic diet?
Yeah.
I just can't see the average person never eating. I mean, I guess if you could say if you're cheating, I'm talking about 100%. Like never eating carbs again. It seems like it would screw up your digestive system. I mean, your social life would be kind of miserable.
For sure.
Yeah, I just think a lot of people don't respond well to it,
What do you think? What do you feel is the drop-off rate usually when, in your experience, when people are kind of going down that road? Because it is the in vogue thing these days.
Yeah. I think there's always a 6-month kind of honeymoon period. Like I know sometimes when a lot of people turn vegan or vegetarian and they have that 6-month honeymoon period. But really what happened was they stopped eating so much. Now they're eating more fruit and vegetables and they feel amazing, but then they do it wrong, as I'm sure you know, because you've been doing that forever. They're just eating fake food and soy all day and,
Yeah, I remember, I think it was Arthur Jones, one of his strategies for the low training volume was he was taking these bodybuilders who had massive volume training programs. In his first 3 days, he'd just rest them. And then and they would get bigger just because they were in recovery, right? Before he even walked in the gym. And then he'd do, one set craziness, which was a total shock. And then he was like, okay, see, my system works better.
Right.
So, and that change, I think that's a really critical marker, is understanding that honeymoon change can kind of make something look better than it is.
Yep.
What do you think about cycling? What do you think about cycling different diets or different styles? Or do different people respond better to certain diets? What's your opinion?
Well, yes, I think different people do respond better to certain diets. I think, some of that has to do with your genetics, your heritage, maybe, what you grew up eating, what your ancestors ate. Certainly, I believe in that. I think Cyclic, a lot of people I know that only prepare people for contests. And a lot of times, like if we have that theoretical where I'm getting someone ready for a movie role or something, I will cycle carbs. So, Vince, I think it goes back to Vince Gironda, like the 3-day ultra low and then a refeed meal. That works great. Sometimes 4 days ultra low and a refeed meal. So that really works incredibly well. And then generally I do carb cycle, but not in a way that's overwhelmingly complex. I'll just tell you to have more carbs on training days. So you just basically add a little bit before, maybe some during, some after, and that's it. And just remove those. So it might be an extra 100 grams on training days and 100 grams less on off days. So a pretty simple way of carb cycling.
Yeah, that's great. And for yourself, because you're a really jacked guy, you're in great shape, and you're kind of living the lifestyle. What would a typical day look like for you, and how you approach your training and your diet?
Okay. Yeah. Basically, I like intermittent fasting, but I've had issues with low body temperature for a while, where it's just kind of like, I'm an intense guy. I'm always going super hard, not getting enough sleep, just running myself into the ground. And that kind of, if you have low body temperature, you can read up more about this. I think Dr. Broda Barnes wrote a bunch of stuff about this. I'm drawing a blank on who else. I'll think of it in a minute. But they talk about the 5 S's, starch, sugar, saturated fat, sleep, sun. So if you have low body temperature, it can negatively affect a lot of things. So I go through that, like where I go through one of those phases where I'm working really hard and training too hard, not sleeping enough. My body temperature will not be 98.6 where it should be. It can dip down to like 97.1, and then I start to feel like crap all the time. So right now I'm eating a little bit more, trying to jack that back up again. And I notice when I jack it back up, my immune system's better. I just feel better in general. So now I'm eating, like I said, I like intermittent fasting for fat loss. But right now, because of where I'm at, I'll get up in the morning. I'll have maybe like 4 to 6 ounces of protein and maybe 30 to 40 grams of carbs. Normally, I would have fruit in the morning, but fruit tends to make me colder. So I'll have starch. So I might just have like a half a sweet potato or a little bit of rice or hot rice cereal or something like that. And like 10, 15 grams of fat, maybe some nut butter in the hot cereal. And then, so I'll eat every 3 hours now. So, but it basically ends up being 4 meals a day, sometimes 5 if it's a training day. And each meal is similar to that, because because of the intense way that I always am, that's just like hard to undo after 42 years. I always kind of have, quote unquote, adrenal fatigue symptoms as well. And I find that eating more balanced meals works for people like that. Like I get a little too much anxiety if I don't have carbs and meals evenly throughout the day. And then I'll notice if I go longer than, let's say, 3.5 hours, my body temperature starts coming down. I start getting cold and I start getting anxious. But if I have a meal, it could just be a small meal. It could literally be like a 4-ounce chicken breast and a half a cup of rice and some kind of like maybe olive oil for some healthy fat in there. I'll feel great.
So you're eating how many times per day?
4 on a training day, probably 5. My biggest meal, because from a social perspective, is always at night, though. I just like to, the small meals are in the day. I just like to bang them down, get it done and keep moving. And just because at night I like to sit down with my wife, hang out, enjoy it. I'm an old school Italian. I like eating big meals at night. So yeah, I try to save most of my calories and most of my carbs for night. So I'll have smaller amounts, like 30, 40 throughout the day, and then maybe like 150 grams of carbs at my night meal.
That's great. We share a lot in common. That seems to be more, would you say, a real athlete's diet? I don't know of a lot of athletes that do well on low carb diets. What's your opinion on that?
I do not. I've never seen an athlete do really well on low carbs personally. I know there's some, but I also know, for example, a few years ago when LeBron tried that really low carb diet and he looked like he lost 35 pounds of muscle and was just awful. I've seen a lot of people backfire with that. So yeah, I think it's just a huge mistake. I would not attempt that, and I would not have any athlete do that. I think athletes definitely need a lot of carbs. And then the thing with athletes too is they're not physique competitors. So the more carbs you give them, usually the better their recovery, the better their performance is going to be. If they're a running back, they can stand to carry an extra 5 to 7 pounds of body weight. Now, a wide receiver, a D-back, might be slightly different, so you have to manipulate that a little bit. But in general, most athletes should carry a little bit more body fat and eat more carbs.
Right. Yeah. If it's a lot of people mistake cosmetic training versus what is an athletic performance training.
Exactly.
And
Wade, you would know as well as anyone, there's a difference. I try to explain this to people a lot. There's a big difference between eating for health, eating for physique, and eating for performance. So if we're just concerned with eating for long-term health, I might tell you don't have more than like 50 grams of animal protein a day, max. Right. It's going to be basically vegetarian, plant-based. Now, if you're eating for physique, I'm going to tweak that a little. I think you're probably going to need a little bit more protein. You need more calories. And higher calorie diets do kind of age you. They produce more free radicals. Not the best thing. But look, if you want to walk around 20 pounds above your normal weight, that's the decision you make. Then eating for performance, like I just said, is different because you're going to eat more carbs and things like that. So there's 3 different ways of looking at it. People sometimes think it's all the same, or they combine, they confuse one or two of the other. It's not.
I think that's a really good point that you bring up here, because, a lot of people come in with a whole mosh pit of ideas about what they heard or what they think they should do or whatever.
Right.
How do you overcome those kind of biases for someone that comes in and says, yeah, man, this is what this guy had me do, or how do you interact with that person that's coming in with those BS systems, if you will?
Yeah, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask this. I mean, I would advise younger coaches and trainers to be able to do that better than I can. But I'm just old school Jersey Italian. It's like, I can't argue. I could tell you what to do and I could explain why. And if you're going to fight me, cool, find somebody else to do the diet that you want. I just can't do it. You know what I mean? I don't have it in me. I could give them the info. I could point them to studies if they want. I could point them to real world examples. But I'm beyond, arguing and trying to convince someone this is the way. Either you trust me or you don't.
I agree with you, because I think a lot of people really what it comes down to is they have a difficult time submitting themselves to just one coach.
Yeah.
Do you see that's an issue today? Like, people are getting so much information, they're trying to do 15 different guys' plans.
Totally. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a huge issue, and that's why I think most times free stuff or low price stuff doesn't help people, because if you have skin in the game, you're going to do so much more. So if I tell someone to eat this diet, but they're my friend, and I write them the diet and it's free, they probably won't do it. But if I send them down the street to my friend Mike and he charges them $1,500 for it, they're going to do it to the letter. So there's something about investing in coaching. I highly believe that people should have coaches for your business, for your training, for whatever you can afford. Invest in coaching. It's really a good idea.
Speaking of the topic, who were your biggest influencers in your career that kind of helped you along the way? What was there? Books? Was there people? Was there anybody that sticks out in your mind and that have made you who you are today?
Are we talking training or business?
Mostly focused for training and health, and we can always dive into business, because sometimes they're applicable.
Yeah,
a lot of people don't realize you can carry over ideas out of the business world and the athletic world, or eyes in the things out of the athletic world into the business world.
Right. So originally, I guess like anybody, Arnold. I don't even know if you and I would be having this conversation if it wasn't for Arnold. So I always take my hat off and pay respect where it's due to Arnold. And then in the original days, there wasn't a ton of information. So I was just reading muscle mags and whatnot. But really what some of the early things that got me really hooked were, there was a book called Dinosaur Training that came out in 96, which was a great book. And that's what first got me away from, well, I shouldn't say that. Actually, I'll backtrack. Super Squats and John McCallum's Keys to Progress.
Okay.
Keys to Progress, probably the greatest book ever about training, because John is the greatest writer and storyteller. So I was doing 80s bodybuilding. Then I read that and I was like, wow, this is amazing. I love this stuff. So I started doing that kind of stuff. Then from there was Super Squats. Then Dinosaur Training was the first thing that introduced me. Like I said earlier, nowadays everybody has kegs and tires and anvils. But in 96, nobody did. But that book came out and you couldn't get this stuff. Like, to get ropes, we had to go down to the docks in New York, or the guy who knew a guy. Like, it was hard. We had to go to old liquor stores and get kegs, but we had all this stuff after I read that book. So that was a huge game changer for me. And then I got really into powerlifting and Louis Simmons and Westside and stuff like that. And I originally just jumped headfirst into Westside and did it completely wrong, which most people do. Then I learned how to do it correctly for raw lifters and then molded it into a system that would work for athletes. So it was not even, it kind of resembled Westside after I tweaked it after about 3 years. It was largely influenced, but it was my own kind of system at that point. So I would say really Louis and Westside would have been my biggest, and those 3 books that I mentioned earlier.
Louis is definitely a legend in the world of strength sports and invented a lot of really cool things. And how did he influence and what part didn't get? And explain to me, because that's a really good point. I think sometimes we'll read a magazine or we'll read a book about somebody and there's so much left out of it because they have to keep, the brevity down there. And oftentimes people will say, yeah, I'm doing this program, but you're really not doing the program.
Exactly.
How did explain that journey to me? Because I think this is really a poignant point.
Cool. So Westside Barbell Club, for those who don't know, is probably the most famous powerlifting gym, I would say, in the world. It's in Columbus, Ohio, and they train lifters who compete in gear. So if you don't know what gear is, it's squats, suits, and bench shirts, which are like this heavy ply material that adds, 50 to 200 pounds to your lifts if you know how to use them correctly. Because of that, they don't do a lot of full range stuff. So for the bench, they'll do board pressing. For squats, they'll do high box squats and whatnot. So I originally started doing that. And everybody that makes that mistake originally, when they go test their squat or their bench, they're like, oh, it hasn't gone up. Yeah, because the bottom position, you didn't train it. So that was the one mistake. So then I started incorporating all full range lifts. The other things I learned from Louis were variety. Now, I originally learned the importance of variety from Larry Scott in his book. I think it was Loaded Guns, and then he had these VHS tapes that I had.
Yeah.
And I remember him saying, he used the analogy of what are the biggest, most common overuse injuries, tennis elbow and golf elbow, and they occur with super light implements. So if you do the same thing over and over again with heavy weights, what do you think is going to happen? And he said something about what's the best way to stave off injury and to keep pumping yourself full of growth hormone. And he may have been off on some of the science. This was way back when.
Sure.
But he said variety. So, and I would notice at Westside that they would rotate the lifts all the time. So those were some of the big takeaways that I got from that. And then safety. In other words, they always use different bars. Louis didn't necessarily do it for safety, but that's why I started doing it. So most people squat with a straight bar. But the reality is a lot of people barely have the shoulder mobility to do that. If you're young and skinny, females tend to do, but guys who have been training a while and are sitting in front of a computer, they don't. So I packed my gym with cambered bars, buffalo bars, which is kind of rounded, so it's a lot easier on your shoulders, safety squat bars, trap bars, Texas deadlift bars that were so much easier on your joints and your body than just regular straight bars. Then to make the training even safer, and again, Louis wasn't really doing this for safety, but he would put chains on the bar so that it was lighter at the bottom and at the top it was heavier. But for just a guy who wants to train heavy and not beat up his joints, if you could take 50 pounds off of the bench at the bottom, that's great. Same thing with like a reverse band press. So I started using all these methods, and at first I didn't know the safety issue, and I was young. I was in my 20s. I didn't care about safety. I just wanted to lift a ton of weight, But then as I went on, I said, wow, it feels so much better with all these bars. And I have guys in their 40s that I was training when I was only 26, 27. They're saying, oh, my God, I feel so much better with these bars. And so that was kind of like so much stuff I took from them, but the safety and how I train now. What I notice is most people typically when they go to the gym, they'll do the big lifts first. So when you do a military press on shoulder day or bench on chest day or however you set it up, if you set upper, lower, whatever. What I noticed when I was watching some of Louis' videos, they would always do glute hams, a bunch of glute hams before squatting. And Louis recommended that if you had weak hamstrings, do them all the time and do those first and do them 4 days a week. But what I noticed is not only did that bring up my hamstrings, but your hips and knees and everything felt better if you had a hamstring pump before doing squats. And he wasn't the only one. There's a lot of old school bodybuilders who have done that too, but I had never thought of that before. And then when I would watch some of his videos of like Chuck Vogelpool, Chuck would do a ton of pull downs and chest supported rows and glute hams and whatnot before his main lifts. So I was like, man, that's going to make you way weaker on your main lifts. And maybe it does, but if you're comparing apples to apples, the thing is you feel so much better. So nowadays when I train, and I'll even have young guys do this, but I think it's really important if you're our age, if you're over 35, instead of going in and starting with bench, most guys who are beat up and 40 say, oh, I can never do big lifts again. Maybe, but if you go in and you start with dumbbell presses, do a few sets of them, then do maybe like a weighted push-up, like a chain-resisted push-up on rings, then you bench, you'll feel 1,000 times better. You're way more prepared. You have a pump. There's something that makes it feel dramatically better. And then if you do what I said, add the specialty bars like a neutral grip bar, add chains to it, you can actually lift heavy and do the old lifts that used to destroy you, just in a totally different way.
That's great. And now for a BiOptimizers fixed digestion tip. Supercharge your protein shake. Everyone knows protein shakes are a great way to sneak in extra protein, build more muscle, even replace meals and burn more fat. The problem is the highest quality protein typically absorbs at around 40%. One way to fix this and dramatically increase how quickly and effective your protein shake digests is to add 2 to 3 capsules of masszymes into your shake. One research study showed that pre-digested protein during a meal increased muscle growth significantly. To take advantage of this, just blend the open capsules into your shake, and within 15 minutes or less, the enzymes will have begun to break down the protein into amino acids. This can make your shakes at least 2 to 3 times more potent. Some people do this and sip on their shake while lifting to provide their muscles with a steady stream of amino acids during their workout. To save 10% on masszymes, use the code SHAKE10, that's SHAKE10, at masszymes.com. That's SHAKE10 at masszymes.com. What other influencers did you feel that have kind of shaped how you go about things? I mean, the fact that you were doing all of these kind of things back in 96 kind of indicates that you're, obviously ahead of your time. Who else influenced you?
Definitely Charlie Francis, because I trained a lot. My clientele was 85, 90% athletes for a really long time. So Charlie Francis really influenced me with his high-low system. And what that means is you do high-intensity training one day. So that might be heavy lifting, jumps, sprints. The next day should be a low-intensity day to let your CNS recover. So the next day you might do some lower intensity conditioning, or for training, maybe just pump day, like 8 to 15 reps instead of going super heavy, doing, plyos or whatnot. So the high-low system, and he was big on low volume for performance. And again, we could talk about the differences, like we talked about the differences with nutrition before. Training and performance and physique training is always going to be a little bit different too. But especially if I had athletes that only had 90 days to get ready for a season, we would definitely use lower volume than I would with a guy who's just looking to get jacked, maybe, or something like that. So, I mean, some of the volume that Charlie used with world-class sprinters was shocking. Like, he was literally doing like 2 sets of cleans, 2 sets of squats or something. That was the workout. So I trimmed volume down quite a bit and got some fantastic results with, 10 and 40-yard sprint times and strength gains with guys. So he was a big influence. Those are the main ones that come to mind right now.
That's great stuff, Charlie. He's a legend in the track and field area. So that's a great testament. Of course, he got a lot of negative fame with the whole Ben Johnson incident.
But the thing is, as you probably know, everybody was testing positive during that race. It just never really came out.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that for a second, because I think one of the things that drives me crazy in the professionals industry is that sometimes people are just not legitimate and clear about some of the agents they may be using in training. And there seems to be a lot of mystery. There's a lot of pro athletes or Olympic athletes and stuff that are using various anabolic substances. What's your opinion on all that sort of stuff? And where do you see people making mistakes, whether they're using it or against it? I'd like to go. We'll go down this rabbit hole for a little bit, because I think it's relative. Because a lot of people just say, okay, I'm going to start working out. I need to get on a cycle or something. Like, what's your opinion?
Sorry. So your question is what's my opinion on drug usage, or?
Yeah. Like, for example, do you have an opinion about drug usage in sports or for people getting in shape? And what's the difference? Yeah. So let's start there and we'll kind of go down it.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough, so many people in professional sports and at the Olympic level are using something. that comes as a shock to a lot of the general public. But if you're in this world, you kind of know it's not a shock at all. It's unfortunate, but who am I to judge, right? So if you're in a pro sport and everybody else, or a majority of the guys, let's take baseball back in the days of McGuire and Sosa.
Sure.
Now, if everybody else is using it and you're a guy who's 33, has a wife and kids, needs to put money on, have money and put food on the table, who am I to judge you if you're going to say, oh, I'm going to take it too because McGuire and Sosa are hitting 70 home runs. If I don't, I'm off the team. I don't know. That's not for me to say. And what would I do in that situation? I don't know. I haven't been in that situation, but you got to do things to provide for your family. Now, for the average person, and is it cheating? Of course it's cheating. It's illegal. To me, I'm a huge Hank Aaron fan, especially what he had to go through. In my mind, Hank Aaron is still the home run king, and so I don't know. I mean, it bums me out, but on the other side of the coin, who am I to judge? It's hard to say, And to be honest with you, I've worked with a lot of athletes at all different levels, and some guys were on stuff. And it wasn't for me to say, oh, I can't train you. Like, I'm not the morality police. The guy came to me. He's being completely honest. I said, cool, I'll do the best. As long as you tell me, I'm going to talk to other guys I know who are drug experts so I can modify your training as best as we can while you're on stuff. I mean, if everybody it's just not my place to judge them. Now, for a regular person, if you start training and you get on stuff, I think you're a moron. I think if you've trained 5 or 10 years and you decide looking like The Rock would make me happy and you want to get on stuff, again, who am I to judge? I don't care. People get nose jobs. People get breast implants, calf implants. It doesn't bother me. What do I care? If you're over 40 and you've gotten the blood work and your testosterone is so low that it may cause you headaches, all kinds of issues, like your immune system will be weak. It could cause depression, inability to sleep. And if you want to get HRT, TRT, what is it? TRT or HRT? Same thing, right?
Testosterone replacement therapy, which is gaining a lot of popularity now. Of course, this was really taboo with medical industry 20 years ago, but now they're 100% on board across the board.
Yeah, because it's healthy. Having low test is not healthy. It's really unhealthy. So I have no problem with that whatsoever. People have got to make their own judgment. And I don't think it's as unhealthy or scary as mainstream media makes it out to be, especially if you're a guy who's 50 and it was chronically low, so you're having all kinds of health issues from it, and now you get on whatever, maybe it's a 200 milligram a week dose or every 10 days or 14 days, whatever it is. That's not like Ronnie Coleman dosages. Nothing's going to happen. Or, I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but I'm saying I don't think it's going to be that bad.
Not to beat a dead horse, but there is a difference between replacement therapy and Mr. Olympia bodybuilding, right?
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people aren't able to separate the difference. It's the same thing. It's like going out for a drink with your wife at a restaurant and hitting the bottle every day. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a differentiation, and I think that there's a polarization out there that it's like it's either evil or which causes it to drive down. And I always think that's always a mistake.
Yeah. Well, wait, I have a friend of mine who's in his 60s and he takes 200 milligrams of testosterone a week, and I'm not sure on the growth hormone. Does 3 IUs a day sound right? 2 or 3, something like that. And he feels fantastic and he looks fantastic. Like, it would be weird for someone to say, oh, you're cheating or that's immoral. Why? He feels great. I mean, people get on all kinds of other drugs, Lipitor and whatnot. What's the difference?
Well, you bring up a great point. And I always thought that I find it interesting how there's a public perception. Of course, I was a natural athlete, but I didn't have an issue about people using drugs. Well, obviously they need to be in a drug competition.
Yeah.
And I think
you'd have a major issue.
Yeah. I think realistically, we just haven't come to grips with it, because the reality is, if you look at the amount of prescription medications that are out, you look at people that are self-medicating through over-the-counter or through recreational drugs or, black market drugs or all these sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Humans as a culture are really drug takers, yet oftentimes you'll see the reporter, writing a piece about a guy like Ben Johnson, let's say,
Yeah.
They're sitting in a bar, knocking back drinks, smoking a cigarette. Right. They're on, 3 different prescription medications, and they're condemning Ben because he wanted to win a gold medal, which I always thought was weird.
It's absolutely insane.
So, switching gears, because that we could just go on about that forever. I think we're really clear on that. What are some things that you do found from a natural side of things that do help people kind of hit that next level in life? Is there a go-to, whether it's diet, whether it's nutritional supplements, whether it's some sort of like technology, like there's all kinds of technology, especially that you're in the hotbed of it all in Santa Monica.
Yeah.
What have you noticed that are things that really do help people achieve their physical goals or improve their health from your experience?
So this is going to be boring and everyone's going to ignore it, but sleep is the number one thing. If you're not getting enough high quality sleep, I don't even know if you should bother with supplements. Honestly, Dr. Kirk Parsley said this. I probably wouldn't even worry about training or diet if you're not getting enough sleep. Again, people are going to ignore that and say, oh, I can do everything else. It's crazy to spend $1,000 a month on supplements and do this fancy training program if you're getting 4 hours of crappy sleep a night. Sleep has to be your number one priority. That's going to change everything. That's the fountain of youth. That's going to help you get leaner, build more muscle, recover. So if you're doing that, then we'll look to stress levels next. Again, boring. Everyone's going to ignore it. But you can do everything right. And if you're super stressed out, your relationship sucks, your finances suck, job sucks, it's still going to be a disaster. You're not going to get lean. You are not going to build muscle. You're not going to feel great. So sleep and stress are number 1 or 2. And beyond that, then we move on to diet. We covered diet a little bit. As far as feeling good, you do want to make sure, like I said, I believe in adequate carbs if you're training hard, and you do have to have a decent amount of fat. I find it very rare that people are going to be deficient in protein, but a decent amount of healthy fats. Otherwise, your testosterone levels are going to plummet. Your skin's going to dry out. Your joints are going to feel crappy. So those are the main things there. And then train hard but smart. Don't destroy your joints. Don't overtrain. Don't do too much. Once we get beyond that, I think just basic old school stuff like a massage, self-massage, self-myofascial release, foam rolling, stuff like that. Everyone should spend more time doing that. And then for newer stuff, which really isn't that new, they've had sensory deprivation chambers forever, but I love that. That's been one of my favorite things. For the last 3 years, I've gone to a float tank once a week, bare minimum, for 2 hours. And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's complete dead silence. It's pitch black. You step in about a foot of water that has 1,200 pounds of Epsom salt in it, and you just float. And as you go more often, you get better at it. You can reach like almost a dream state, or almost like if you've ever had edible marijuana or something like that, you can reach that level without anything, like this higher altered level of consciousness. And you see a lot of stuff in there. You figure out a lot of stuff. But from a recovery, because you soak up all the magnesium, you feel super relaxed. You feel great. It de-stresses you. But your joints decompress. That's basically zero gravity. You're floating. I get out of there. My spine, my knees, everything feels great. So that's one of my favorite things. And then cryo chambers also I love. I go to cryo as well. I'd highly recommend people check that out as well. Those are kind of the 2 newer things that I've added over the last few years. How
often do you do cryotherapy? Because that's really becoming the rage in performance athletes, and it's now kind of it always starts at the top and kind of trickles into the population. How long have you been doing it? How often do you recommend it? And
so what I find is the best is if you can find a place. Most of them do offer a monthly membership, and it's not that bad. Most places will be like between $50 and $70 for the 3 minutes. But if you get a monthly membership, you might be able to get one for $300-$400, because going 30 days straight can absolutely change your life. It's an absolute game changer. You feel phenomenal. All your joints feel better. You sleep better. Your mood is better. Everything improves. If you just go once a week, it takes a while. Like, you feel great afterwards. You get the sense of euphoria. You sleep great that night, and it does help. But I find even if you could just afford to go for like a week straight, getting that back to back to back really makes a big difference. And then, whatever, as much as you can afford to go after that, but having that streak at the beginning is important.
You touched on something that I've noticed when kind of integrating a new modality, and you kind of touched on it here in cryotherapy. There's kind of an immersion factor. and I think this applies to people who are trying to get in shape really quickly in one of the social environments. What's your opinion on if you're trying to learn something in immersion? Have you seen that in other areas, not just cryotherapy or other things? There's kind of like a threshold you got to go past. What's your experience on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Like, they always say, if you want to learn Spanish, move to Spain or something like it. I agree with you on that immersion, just jumping in. I mean, that's always been my personality, almost to a fault, where I get too obsessed with something. Like if I get into something, it's 24/7 for about 3 months. But I think that does help a lot in anything you do. Just going hard like that and totally immersing yourself in it, surrounding yourself with people who are like knowledgeable in it, and
What do you think are the things that trip people up? Whether it's starting on a program or staying on a program, what have you noticed in that area?
So it would be different now than it was years ago. Now it's just what we said earlier. It's just the information overload, and people are always trying something new, and they may be switched over to something. At 9 a.m, they may look at Instagram and see a guy who does all body weight and say, oh, that's it, I'm only doing body weight. And then by 9 p.m, they're looking at a guy powerlifting and they're ordering squat shoes. It's like, it's totally crazy, and it's really hard to kind of beat that. That's why I honestly think you have to invest. Like if you hire a coach, you're going to get somewhere. Even if what he tells you, 30% of it is wrong, if you adhere to it, you're going to get great results than just doing something different every other day. Like if 1 week you're keto and the next week you're vegan, the next week you're doing Flex Wheeler's diet from 93, it's not going to work. You have to stick with something. So just adhering to something that's even halfway decent is going to get you really good results. It's just dedication and hard work at the end of the day. As much as I'd like people to think that my training system is the greatest, like there's nothing that's going to turn you into George St. Pierre or The Rock in 90 days or even a year. You know what it is? Right. It depends on their parents and what they've been doing and what you've been doing for the last 10, 20, 30 years. It's just dedication and sticking with something. Now, years ago, it might have been a little different because we didn't have the internet. So what would have prevented people from sticking with something? I think I found that it was that they would get bored. So that was why I just tried to, even though maybe it wasn't what purists would say, I would vary the workouts and just add more fun stuff. And if anyone's listening who is a gym owner or a trainer, it's really important, read the Starbucks experience, make it their third place. They're not just coming to you for the workouts, and they're not just coming to you for the fat loss or the couple inches on their biceps. They want it to be fun too. So you have to be fun, get some joke books, play fun music, do stuff like that to make it fun.
What do you feel was the biggest obstacle that you've had to overcome personally kind of to get where you are today? Because, a lot of people would look up to you, or they might be in the industry and they say, man, I'd love to be like Jason. But oftentimes they don't know the backstory. If you don't mind sharing, what do you think was the biggest obstacles that you had to becoming, as successful as you are now these days?
Yeah. So as a kid, I was really shy and insecure, and I had a ton of anger. My parents used to fight like cats and dogs, and I just remember just screaming and bottles breaking and things smashing all the time, and just like constant warfare and battle. And so I was scared of my own shadow because I didn't know what was coming next, and I was just terrified. And that made me just very quiet and socially awkward. And I did well in business for years, but I had this underlying shyness and anger. And I did decent with one-on-one training. I could talk to people and make it fun. Smaller groups, okay. Even eventually I got comfortable with the bigger groups in the gym, but only in the gym because I was comfortable there. I'm controlling the music. I'm controlling the workouts. You get me outside in a social situation, I'm still that kid, scared, shy, awkward, nervous, angry, bitter. So finally I had an awakening one day. I was like, man, this is not who I want to be. I can't just only be good in the gym and then not able to function outside. So I went on a few-year journey of, reading certain books, surrounding myself with the people, cutting out the negative people in my life, the deadbeats, and getting around the people that I wanted to be, and then just studying charismatic people and people who I looked up to, and people that were able to make people laugh and feel better about themselves, kind of be the life of the party, people enjoy being around. And, it took a lot of time. And I went to public speaking classes, and I took stand-up comedy classes and improv classes, and I literally made it. So, people will track their PRs in the gym, and you'll write down your workouts and your diet, but you don't think about this kind of stuff. So I would literally just make, okay, now here's going to be my PRs. How many people can I nod and smile to each day? How many people can I acknowledge and start a conversation with? When I'm in the elevator and everyone else is looking down, well, I have the balls enough to say hi and start a conversation with somebody, or talk to the checkout girl at Whole Foods. So I started doing that, and that was my main thing, more than setting squat PRs or whatever. And just like anything else, it became easier, it became habit, where now people who knew me 20 years ago would never recognize me. Totally different person. And at first I was just acting. I was doing my best Robert De Niro when I went out, trying to be someone else. Now it's just who I am. It's not an act at all. But that really made the difference, was just working on overcoming all that stuff. And I think a lot of people need to maybe think about that more and address that if you have any of those issues. I mean, we all have issues from childhood or family or whatever that sometimes you forget about or you don't address, but it can be a game changer when you finally do.
That's amazing. You've been doing this a long time. You've seen a lot of things. What gets you motivated each and every day to go into that gym and take on a new client or go through that whole thing? What makes you tick, and why do you do what you do?
I still just love, I love people. I love helping people. I love inspiring people to kind of, become the strongest version of themselves. And almost anything that they're going through, I've been through. If someone's skinny and weak and that's why they want to transform, or they're insecure, I get it. Totally get it. If they're getting older and they want to feel younger and they're beat up and their joints hurt, totally get it. I could relate to that. There's so many things that I could relate to because I've been doing this for so long. I made every mistake you could make. I lived, there was years where I was drinking way too much, partying way too much, blowing all my money, ended up broke. So I could help you with that. I've been there and done that. I built back up a successful business. I made so many mistakes, and it gets me fired up to help people not make the same mistakes, or if they've made the same mistakes, share with them, hey, here's how I got out of it. Here's what I did. Hopefully this could help you. I just really enjoy that. That's what fires me up.
That's awesome. You have a podcast show called Renegade Radio.
Yes.
You want to talk to us about what Renegade Radio is all about and the guy that's on there?
Cool. Yeah. We started the podcast a little over 2 years ago. And it kind of goes back a little bit to what I was just talking about. For years, I only wrote online. And I was a decent writer, and I built up a good business writing. But I was still going through that stuff where I was just really insecure. So I don't know that I'd ever be able to get on video or get on radio or audio or anything like that. And finally, I'd overcome that. And I wanted to do more stuff. And as a kid, I remember starting to listen to Howard Stern in 1987 when, sometimes my dad was driving me around in the morning or whatever, listen to Howard Stern. I was like, and when I entered college in 92, I was a communications major, and I either wanted to do that or make films or host Sports Center. But again, I was like kind of delusional because I was super insecure and quiet. So I went through that and it just wasn't working out for me. But then one day, a couple years back, I turned 40 and I'm thinking, I got to do all this stuff. Like, this is stuff I really want to do that I put off for 20 something years. So, just being able to turn on the mic and talk about, generally there's fitness talk, there's personal development talk. There's some comedy, there's some stupid stuff, stories, we joke around, anything that I think is cool and interesting and that guys our age would enjoy, get a kick out of, entertain a little bit. And hopefully, there's always a takeaway, something they can apply to their life in their fitness, their relationships, their self-confidence, maybe their business. Each episode has a little takeaway, a few laughs, and that's it.
Great. Couple rapid fire questions before we go. Optimal amount of times a week to lift for most people?
I'd say 3 for most people.
Carbs or no carbs?
Carbs. The only way I cut carbs is with a pizza cutter.
Most influential person in your life?
Ooh, wow. I can't narrow it down to one, but I always give a nod to Alan Cosgrove and Dave Tate. Both guys are in the fitness industry. Dave Tate runs, he originally started at Westside. He runs elitefitness.com, elitefts.com. And those guys were hugely influential to me especially during some really hard, dark times for me.
That's great. Most influential book?
Ooh, hard to narrow it down.
You can always say 2 or 3 if you want.
Yeah, so I love, basically they're almost the same book, but I love The One Thing and Essentialism. Awesome books to help you kind of 80-20 your life and figure out what's important. For just overall kind of personal development, I read a passage from these each day. Is The Art of Living by Epictetus and the Tao Te Ching. I love those two. Great
references. I love those myself. Thing that drives you crazy?
Oh boy, I have so many, but I'll give you one that just popped into my head. I mean, I could do a lot of these, but one is when people ask, "What is that?" When I'm eating something, if we're out with a group of people eating, and I'm trying something, and I go, "Oh, it's amazing! You got to try it," and they're looking at it, picking around, because I'm a foodie. Like I grew up, old school Italian house. I just eat. They're like, "Oh, what is that?" I'm like, "Just eat it. Just try it. Don't worry about it." It just drives me nuts. I don't know why.
That's funny. Thing about you that most people wouldn't guess or wouldn't know?
I dance around the house a lot. A lot of dancing. We always have music cranking, and I'm always doing some kind of wacky Michael Jackson dance or something in the living room.
Great favorite type of music?
Old school hip hop, Public Enemy, Tribe Called Quest, all that kind of stuff.
Favorite place to take a vacation?
I'll say, because it's recent, we just stayed at the resort at Pedregal in Cabo, and it was probably the most amazing place I've ever stayed. It's a 5-diamond place. The level of service is absolutely mind-blowing. I can't recommend that place enough.
That's great. Where do you see yourself in the next decade?
The next decade, I will still be living here. People ask, we moved from Jersey out to Santa Monica 6 years ago. People ask, are you moving anywhere? No, this is it. I love Santa Monica. It's the birthplace of physical culture. I love it. So we'll be here, and I will still be basically doing what I do now. I love what I do. Ideally, I would say I would be, this will surprise people, but I'll be performing regularly in improv shows and at the Comedy Store on the side. That's outside of my fitness business, but I love doing that a lot. So I've been trying to get more into that. So if you told me in a few years from now, a decade from now, that every Tuesday and Wednesday night I'd be at the Comedy Store doing a 15-minute set on Sunset, I would be thrilled with that. And yeah, that's about it.
And to finish up, the 3 most important things you feel for someone who wants to kind of live life at that highest level of physical expression, what would be the 3 things that you would think is the most important?
I would say, now are we talking about fitness in general or just life kind of?
It could be either one. You do both because they're kind of interrelated.
Yeah. So I would say, for me, fitness is the most important thing before business and before relationships, because I think, like Arnold always used to say, The Rock talks about how it's his anchor. If you're not physically fit, you can't be mentally fit. You can't be happy. You can't have great relationships. So that has to come first. So I would say get your fitness in order, even if that's 3 20-minute workouts a week and some kind of moderately healthy way of eating. Fitness is number 1. And then relationships are number 2. So all the stuff that I talked about overcoming, if you can't build relationships effectively and communicate effectively, it doesn't matter if you could take a ton of steroids and do the best workout. I can give you the best business plans in the world. None of that matters. At the end of the day, the Maya Angelou quote's going to be true. People forget what you did, forget what you said, but they'll never forget the way you made them feel. And like having some people to share that with is so important. And they say the average American has less than 1 true friend. And for years that was me, and that's a lot of people. But once you learn to build relationships and make people feel great, like everything changes. And then it's not just about you anymore. So I would say relationships are number 2. That's the most important thing. And 3, money's not everything. It can't buy you happiness, but you got to have your business in order. And I would suggest, if you're not where you want to be financially or with your business, hire a business coach for 6 months to a year. I do that every other year. For anywhere between 90 days to a year, I hire somebody and I'm accountable to them, because as much as people and I like to think that I can be productive and get stuff done, you're not unless you have someone there that's holding you accountable and telling you what to do. And it's always hard to see your own stuff. So I could coach someone else on their business and they'll say, oh, but you're not doing that with yours. And I'm like, oh, right. I didn't even see that. You need somebody else to point out those things. It's really hard to see your own stuff.
Cognitive biases really limit us.
Yeah.
This has been awesome. Where do people find out about you? How do they come do a workout at your place? What's the whole story there?
So you can go to my blog is jasonferruggia.com. That's my main site. Since it's hard to spell and remember, renegadefitness.com will direct you there, or renegadestrengthcoach.com will redirect you there. The podcast is renegaderadiopodcast.com. And that's where you can pretty much find out everything about, we have some new stuff coming out, some new programs, some new apps. We're doing some live events, some higher end coaching. So you can find it all out at those sites.
That's great. And where are you located again?
Santa Monica, California. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, this has been informative, and I'm really grateful that you took the time today out of your busy schedule, because I know you got a lot of things going on in your life, business-wise, comedy-wise, relationship-wise. You're living your tenets there. I want to thank you so much for being on the Awesome Health Podcast, and we'll make sure that
great.
All the points will be here in the show notes, and we'll get you a copy for you and your team.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much, Wade. I really enjoyed it.
And now for a BiOptimizers fixed digestion tip: how to get away with eating sugar. Hey, look, sugar is normally one of the worst things for you. But let's be honest. I mean, we all cheat from time to time. And here's a little trick that will ensure your body benefits from the sugar. Now, before you eat or drink anything sweet, take 5 to 8 capsules of P3OM. The patented strain in the formula devours sugar so fast it literally doubles in the body every 20 minutes in the presence of sugar. That doesn't mean that you can or you should eat a bunch of sugar or sit around all day doing that. But on the days that you do cheat, or you go after one of those maybe meals that you wouldn't normally do, this ensures that you get something in your gut that eats the sugar. And it's not going to feed the bad guys or spike your blood glucose nearly as much. So to learn more about P3OM and its sugar-devouring and protein-digesting properties and how it can transform your gut and metabolism, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the BiOptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.